And welcome everyone to today's webcast. We're pleased to have with us from the NCUA, John Kutchey, and now here is the President and CEO of the Cooperative Credit Union Association, Ron McLean. Ron?
Well, thanks, Walter, and hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our session today with the NCUA's Eastern Region Director, John Kutchey. As always, want to wish you and everyone at your credit union, everyone close to you. On behalf of CCUA, hope you are certainly all healthy and well. Thrilled to welcome back John. John, if you may recall, joined us early on in the pandemic. It was in the March timeframe, so I want to thank John for being accessible with CCUA. So as the director of the Eastern Region for NCUA, John oversees the examination of a number of states along the eastern side, starting from Maine down to Virginia, West Virginia, but also states such as Michigan and Ohio, and certainly all of the states for CCUA. So John, welcome to the group today. I know our members are excited to have you interact with them. They have submitted some questions that I will share during today's event. And we will certainly give our membership a chance to ask questions of your own. We will open up the lines later on for you to do so. But real quick, prior to becoming regional director, John served as NCUA's deputy executive director. He is also the past director of risk management and also Region 2's director of supervision. So a past examiner, a person with a great wealth of background and knowledge on NCUA. And before working with NCUA, he worked at various credit unions. So again, John, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Your interacting with our members today is very timely, given the release of the letter from NCUA about supervisory priorities. So without further ado, John Kutchey will lead off, and then we'll jump into some Q&A. John, it's all yours.
Great, Ron. Just making sure you can hear me okay. Made a couple of adjustments on my end.
Yep, fire away.
Well, good, okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I always appreciate the invite to these events. Gives me an opportunity to interact directly with the credit unions and for you as leaders in the industry to get a chance to hear what we're doing and what we're thinking and get my perspective directly and the same perspective that I give to the examiners who are in your credit union. So I always appreciate these opportunities. I'm only going to take a few minutes to give you a few pieces of information to give more time for Q&A and for discussion. But just to let you know kind of where we are at this point, we're still in the same phase of examinations as we were back when we started off-site on March 16th. We are doing no on-site examinations at this point. We are making only very few, and I mean out of 2,000 credit unions in the Eastern region, we've been on site to 3. So it's very, very rare, and those tend to be extremely significant safety and soundness problems that can't be deferred. The big change that's happened since the last time I spoke to this group is the fact that we are issuing examination reports to credit unions. So we're back in that mode. So exam reports with examiner findings, documents of resolution, you will see those as you complete your exam. We are doing it completely virtually at this point. So everything is done off-site. We're trying to do video conferences for exit meetings and interaction. We do know that the exams are, just because of the inefficient nature of them and you learning and our staff learning how to use these new tools at the same time and procedures, takes a little bit longer to get through, a little bit more interaction that goes on with exchanging of emails and things, and it's just taking a little more time and resource from our end. But we are getting through. We've done several hundred examinations, have a lot more scheduled, and that's kind of where we are with the exam program. Ron had indicated just the other day, our chairman, Chairman Hood, signed a new supervisory priorities letter, which kind of outlines what our focuses are going to be for the remainder of 2020. And I would guess and venture, this is just John Kutchey talking, that this is going to look a lot like the 2021 supervisory priority letter as well. Kind of shifted gears into what you would probably anticipate, which is more COVID-19 specific type actions. And we'll be able to talk, I know there's some questions that'll come in on that subject, and I'll be able to talk about those more. So I won't do a lot of that up front, but just to let you know that we're shifting gears in our exam focus and supervision to do more of the COVID-19 type economic risk, which is largely credit risk, a bit liquidity risk, and just making sure your risk management processes match what you're doing in the membership assistance area. And again, we can talk more about that as we go through. So Ron, I wanted to keep it kind of brief so we'd have more time for Q&A, and I can always expand as we go.
Yeah, John, thank you. And a question that if I was a credit union CEO or one of our attendees today, and you touched on it briefly, but they get a call or an email or whatnot from their examiner that's going to come in, schedule their exam. What can they expect to be the focus, the emphasis, what to prepare for? I know you have the supervisory letter, there's a lot there, but if you can boil it down to a couple of things and maybe go into the weeds a little bit, that might be helpful to our members. But again, I'm sensitive that this is a new world we're living in today with the pandemic, and as the examiner does that virtual exam, any guidance on what they can expect that might be helpful for them to prepare for it?
Sure, great question. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of a tip that is not, for some reason, it has not been generally published yet. And I thought it was actually going to be in the supervisory letter, but it wasn't. So I want to let you know there's a really nice chapter that's been added to the NCUA Examiner's Guide. It's called the COVID-19 chapter. And it's there on our website for public viewing, but it's not easy to get to. So I tested this out before this meeting so I could tell you where to go. If you pull up the supervisory priorities letter, there's in the very first paragraph, it makes reference to updates to the NCUA's Examiner's Guide. And the word Examiner's Guide is actually an active link. If you click that link while you're online, it takes you to the Examiner's Guide. And if you look down the left side of the screen, it lists with links to all of the chapters. There's a chapter that's specifically called COVID-19, which is something that our examiners are going to use as a reference tool in asking you questions and things for them to ponder as they're doing their examination. So it's a really cool, insightful piece. I wish, this is just me talking, I wish we would have made it more prevalent than it is, but it is out there and it's not intended to be hidden from you, but it gives you a really good insight if you're getting ready for your exam. So I jotted down some of the things that I wanted to make sure that you know that's in this chapter that you might want to take a read through. It talks about the Paycheck Protection Program, some of the questions that we're asking our examiners to discuss with you. It has a section on loan modification and forbearances. It has a section on the allowance for loan and lease loss account, things that you should be considering and our examiners will be looking for. It also talks a little bit about cybersecurity and the changes that need to be made or that are probably considered by you in terms of off-site workforces. So that's something that's in here as well, and liquidity risk. So there's a handful of topics that we're asking our examiners to touch on. And I said the cool part is the office did a really nice job, in my opinion, of a general dialogue on each of the subjects. And then just a handful of questions, and it's not really gotcha type questions, it's more open-ended, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And the allowance for loan losses is a classic one. Like, have you or are you working with your accountants to look at the economic factors as part of your allowance for loan and lease losses? And if so, how are you considering those? It's not a, you didn't do this. It's a, hey, here's some things you should be looking at if you aren't already thinking about it. And that's the way the chapter is set up. It's not a straight questionnaire where there's just yes and no responses. It's more things that should be considered when we're looking at these subjects. So again, the first paragraph of the supervisory priorities letter, examiner's guide link right in it, and then click on the COVID-19 chapter, and it's a pretty good read.
Okay, John, thank you. Another question I've gotten from our CEOs. From the outset, NCUA and many state banking departments, I think really took the approach of giving credit unions a lot of space to do what they do best during the pandemic, to help their members kind of pull back a little bit on, being perceived as a burden, if you will, but giving credit unions a lot of room to maneuver and to operate. What is the mindset of NCUA right now as far as that kind of level of flexibility on, X, Y, and Z about to operate during the pandemic? We're into, maybe month 4 now, the pandemic, it's a little more into it, but maybe share some thoughts on that if you don't mind.
Sure, great question again. So in all the early documents that the agencies released, and there were numerous, we probably issued somewhere between 15 and 20 letters to credit unions where we talk about making sure that the credit union has the room and the latitude to serve their members, help their members. They will not be, quote unquote, unduly criticized by the agency for those efforts. So there's the balance of that statement with the reality that we run an insurance fund. So we can't ignore risk to the insurance fund. So there's a balancing act that goes there where we don't want to be critical of what the credit union has done, but we also need to call the risk the way it is or the way we perceive it. So we will be looking at the programs the credit unions have implemented and assessing the risk level, and the risk ratings that we assign and the CAMEL that we assign actually will reflect those risks, because that's the CAMEL and the risk ratings we assign is what drives our agency reserving and our supervision program. It's how we decide where our resources go. So the CAMEL rating is not meant to be critical of you, it's meant to help us figure out where we need to spend our time. And sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle because credit unions often see it as a report card of their performance. For us, it's a resource allocation tool. So I wanted to kind of stress that point to you. So we will call the risks what they are. The balancing act is not being overly critical of the credit union officials for doing what they did. Even though risk may be elevated, we need to talk about that with the officials without saying, you guys just blew it. This is really bad. It's more, hey, have you thought about these different things? And the chapter I just mentioned on COVID-19 takes that approach. And this is what I've told my examiners to do. They need to be gentle in the discussions with you guys and not to be overly critical, but still try to help you resolve whatever risk issues we think may have come into play. So I'll use credit risk as an example. Say you put in a loan modification program and maybe did it because things were moving so quickly without controls in place, without necessarily thinking all the way through to, okay, what happens as we come out of COVID-19? Those are the kinds of things we're going to ask you about and we're going to talk to you about, but not necessarily give you a formal document or resolution of you got 90 days to fix this. It's going to be, hey, here's things you really need to address as you go forward. Let's spend some time working through those. To emphasize the sensitivity the agency has to that, I want you to know one of our existing policies is no new document of resolution can be issued to a credit union in the Eastern region unless I've seen it and I agree with it. So that's a departure from our normal exam process where the examiner and the supervisory examiner agree to the content and issue it to you. It has to actually go through 3 layers now in order for it to be issued. The SE has to see it. My associate regional director over the SE has to agree to it. And then if those 2 parties agree, then it comes to me for a final yes or no. So we put theoretically controls in place to make sure that promise that we made to not unduly criticize and layer on you is carried out. And if that is the case, then it's my fault as the regional director. I can let you know I had a meeting with all of my first line supervisors this morning, just by coincidence, in the nature of the beast. I do it every Thursday with them. And we talked a lot about the fact that our number of documents of resolution have actually declined significantly since we put this process in place. Even non-COVID related DORs have sort of slowed down. And I'm trying to figure out why, and I'm going to actually explore that further. Hopefully they're not afraid to give me what they think needs to be done. That was not the intent of the program we put in place. It was just to make sure that I'm carrying out the board's desire to not unduly criticize and layer on you. So you guys know.
Yeah, excellent insights, John. So in the supervisory letter that was issued recently, one item within there that I want to just focus in for a second. When the pandemic hit, a lot of credit unions had staff that were really forced to work remotely. In some case, hundreds of employees, in a short time period. So they did a great job of making that transition very quickly on a dime. But cybersecurity, the challenge, if you will, of having employees maybe access networks, information, databases remotely, and I imagine that will impact part of the exam going forward. Cybersecurity of that, more of a shift maybe than pre-pandemic. Maybe talk about that, John, for a little bit.
Sure. Very timely, very appropriate. So 2 weeks from today, our headquarter Office of Examination Insurance is going to be meeting with all of our IT field specialists on this exact subject. So we'll be having some internal conversation as to what we should be looking at and how. And I think the supervisory letter that we just issued the other day actually talks about this as one of the features of our cybersecurity program as we go forward. With that said, I don't have the exact look and feel of that, but we also understand, and I'm hoping that my staff understands and carries out, that we were all moving at 1,000 miles an hour and doing whatever we had to do to keep business alive. And just as a leader in the executive ranks, that means sometimes you got to accept some risk that you normally wouldn't, and that's understood. And Ron, I know I've done this with you guys before, and I think I mentioned then, my region's actually got municipal credit union in conservatorship, which is a $3.5 billion credit union in Manhattan. And when a credit union's in conservatorship, what that means is the regional director is the chair of the board. So, and actually the board, the decisions end with me. So I've had to deal with all of these same issues that all of your credit unions are dealing with. And I had to make real-time decisions with the management team, get people off-site, issue them the equipment so we can keep the place going, do what we can up front to protect the assets, which is information and personally identifiable information, but understand we're going to be taking some risk when we do this. But we put service over the IT risk. Now we're sort of in what's, the new steady state. Things have kind of settled down, and now what we're doing is spending a lot more time going back to make sure everything is shored up. And I would think that that would generally be the practice across credit unions at this point. So again, expect our IT folks to come in. This will be a point of review. But again, not criticizing on why you did what you did, but okay, what do we got now and what do we need to do going forward? And those are the kinds of actions that we would work with the credit union on.
Okay, John, thank you. And I'll ask, I have a number of additional questions. I'll ask one, then I'll open it up for our members to ask some questions. So, the pandemic really, I guess, hit hard in the middle of March timeframe. So the first quarter data for NCUA came out, and I think there were signs of where things were going when it came to declining net interest margin, increases in delinquencies, higher provisions, and on down the line. So are you able to share, based on examinations, any insights about more recent financial metrics of what you're seeing out in credit union land?
Yeah, unfortunately, Ron, one of the challenges that we have is we only get the data quarterly. So we don't do any interim, like, monthly calls to credit unions to get updated. I know, like, CUNA, those guys sometimes do that and publish some of what they're seeing. So sad for me to say their information is way more current than what ours is. Obviously, we're past the June 30th quarter end, and we're getting ready to get into call report collection time. So that question, another 2 or 3 weeks from now, will be very relevant.
Yeah,
but right now, just being perfectly transparent with you, we're flying a little bit blind right now what the real impact has been on credit unions. We have done, as your members would know, we've done 2 information collections with them, where our examiners actually called every credit union to get some information, particularly as it relates to forbearance programs, modification programs, liquidity levels. So we did do that on an interim basis, but even the last collection we did was almost 60 days ago now, which in this current environment might as well be 10 years. Everything's changing and moving so quickly with unemployment, economic impact, COVID spiking again. So cities and states are thinking about closing back down. So when we thought we had passed the bubble, turns out we may be back in the middle of it. So we're flexing day to day, week to week with our operation, and we know credit unions are doing the same thing. But early indications from the exam work we've been doing has shown a pretty good overall result. There hasn't been what we call cliff jumpers, where people just went off crazy with the stuff they were doing, and where the impact's been really super difficult on a credit union. I guess I can add this too. We are in the process of looking at some specific industries that we'll be looking at between call report cycles. So one of the big things to hit early on in this was oil and gas industry. With everything that was going on with oil prices and stuff, the oil industry, or the energy industry, was really tanking. So we did do some interim reviews in the credit unions that are concentrated in their fields of membership in those areas. And so far, thankful to say, it hasn't been horrible. It's got some challenges, but not terrible. But we're also going to zero in on some of the other troubled industries. You think the travel industry, so those credit unions that focus and primarily serve airlines, hotel chains, the retail industry has taken a big hit. So those types of things we'll be doing some interim reviews on, just to get a sense for, do we have any extra elevated risk where we need to spend more supervision time.
Excellent. So John, I'm going to read a question that's submitted by one of our CEOs in Massachusetts. And so will NCUA regulators be issuing any COVID-specific guidance about how they expect credit unions to manage credit risk and commercial borrowers in their commercial business loan portfolios during and post-crisis? Specific guidance on how to manage the following would be helpful to commercial lenders: past accruals, non-accruals, deferrals, credit risk rating, allowance for loan loss reserves, property appraisals, etc. But that was a question that came in from one of our CEOs.
I saw that question from you in advance, Ron. So I've actually passed that to our headquarters policy office. I have not heard back from them yet.
Okay.
I'm not aware of anything specific that we're doing in that area. I do know that commercial lending in and of itself is an area a little bit higher risk at this point, just because of the nature of the way COVID has played out, and retail businesses and strip malls and other places and office buildings are taking a hit on rents and income flow at this point. But I don't know of anything specific that we are going to issue there, but I do have the question out, so I'll make sure I follow up with you directly on that to see. And if it's not, it's actually a great topic, so I'm hoping it's a supervisory letter or something that they'll consider issuing on that subject.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to ask Walter Lascos, who is kind of the behind the scenes coordinating the session today. Walter, I'd like to give our members a chance to ask questions of John. I have a few more questions, but I'd rather take a break and give our members a chance to chime in. And for those members, if you are not speaking, just please remember to put yourself on mute for any background noise. So Walter, green light to open up the lines, and I encourage our members to take a moment and ask a question of John if you like.
And Ron, what we have going on, right, we have 3 questions in right now from members who are watching. So let me click on that icon, and or Ron, you can, if you access it, you may be able to see it too. Yeah, you could go there. Any other members with questions, we have either the Q&A icon, you could click there, type it in. You could type it into the chat room, or just click at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand, click on the hand. And then we will unmute your microphone so you could ask it. Ron, I'll give it back to you for the questions.
Yeah, great, Walter, thank you. Good reminder on that. So, John, so a question that came in is the NCUA considering extending the current PCA exception requirements beyond year-end 2020? As a result of the COVID-19, many credit unions are experiencing unprecedented deposit asset growth, causing capital ratios to decline rapidly. Easing the PCA requirements would be a great help to credit unions.
That's a super question. So I don't have any specific intel yet that they're actually planning to extend, but I can tell you the discussions that have been going on internal in the agency on PCA and everything else that we've done that's been of a temporary nature, looking at extending just about everything at this point. As you look at how COVID has played out, we've been operating internally that we thought the actual COVID period would be maybe a 3-month event. So by the summer, we're out of it and we're just dealing with economic fallout going forward. So we figured under that scenario, a year in expiration for a lot of the temporary things we've done would make sense. But let's look at this in realistic terms now. We are in the middle of July and there's still no end in sight. Places are still shut down. Places that opened up are shutting back down. So I think what we thought would be a potentially short-term down period is going to extend. And as such, I would expect to see that a lot of the temporary actions we've taken will go out further. I can't speak for the board on this at this point because I don't know where they are in the deliberative process, but I would fully anticipate, given where we are, that that's under consideration again.
Yeah. John, speaking of extensions, a question came in. Will there be another extension for the June 30th call report?
My understanding is no. If a credit union has a very specific need and issue, I encourage you to talk to your examiner, and if that doesn't work, then their supervisory examiner, if something's really keeping you from getting it done. But for the most part, we're back to a normal call report cycle. When we did the extension last time, we were able to get, with the extension in place, within the normal time frame, over 93-94% of credit unions reported on time anyway. So it was a smaller universe. And the challenge we have, as I mentioned earlier, our only source for ongoing information is the call report. So if we keep extending out the deadline on it, we fly blind as an agency on industry trends for those extra weeks that extend the period out. So it's not that we don't want to be helpful, but we really can't get our job done as an insurance fund without all the data. So again, on an exception basis, if something's really in your way for getting it done, let us know. But for the most part, we're not in a position to be generally extending the deadline at this point.
Okay, thank you. And again, a reminder to our attendees, if you want to submit a question, the Q&A is an area to submit that. I can read that back, or you can certainly raise your hand. So I have a few more questions. John will keep at it. And so one that came in a short while ago was in regards to state regulators, as far as, are you seeing, in general, I guess is where to say it, any trends of maybe where state regulators might be having somewhat different priorities than NCUA when they go in and do their exam? But again, broadly speaking, state, you cover a number of states across the East. Any perhaps, trends you're seeing from the state regulator side?
Actually, we work very well with our state counterparts, and I can say that for across the region, we have really good working relationships. Honestly, for the most part, the priorities are pretty consistent. I mean, we're in the regulator's business, so you would expect that we would have the same potential views and challenges on things. This is sort of outside the question, but one of the challenges that we are seeing a bit in the region is squeezed budgets on the state level. Not necessarily in New York and not necessarily in all of my states along the coast, but we are seeing a few spots where there's some furloughs going on to help eliminate the budget deficits in some different states, where the state examiners can't necessarily get in on the schedule that they were hoping to do exams. So you've got NCUA picking up some extra work to help fill those gaps, or changing exam due dates to help accommodate what schedules are available at the state level. So that's one of the, and that's normal. Normally during an economic down cycle, we run across this with the different states. Unfortunately, it's just the way, the nature of the beast of what they have to deal with and how they're funded. But that is one of our challenges.
Yeah, John, thank you. And the next question might be a little bit premature. Pre-pandemic, this is perhaps maybe a board level question, but Chairman Hood was a vocal champion for financial inclusion. And just given the past few months of the unrest and the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, will there be a greater focus on DEI and financial inclusion from a NCUA board level perspective that you might be aware or able to share, that might just be kind of re-emphasized given the past few months in the country?
Great question. It is obviously, diversity and inclusion is an area that's obviously in recent weeks seen a huge increase in the level of interest and engagement, just because of the nature of what's been going on in the country. And it's something, though, that we've been trying to focus on. When I was in the executive director's office up until January, when I moved over as the regional director. So I worked daily with our diversity and inclusion folks in offices, so I can speak to some of the history of this. We've been trying to engage the industry into more of this conversation over the last few years. We developed a survey that we send out that credit unions can voluntarily complete on an annual basis to give us some insight of things that we can do. But short of a change in law, I don't see us ever examining or requiring anything of credit unions on this subject. You think I'd remember the title of the act where the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion was created. I've only dealt with it for 8 years. Anyway, the act that created this function within each of the FIREA agencies stopped short of allowing the agencies to create regulation around diversity and inclusion. So that's why I believe that you'll never see a regulation around it, and you'll never see us examine and require anything of credit unions. It'll be something of education. It'll be something of engaging in dialogue and trying to build momentum that way. And if you look at our history, over the last handful of years, that's exactly what's occurred, and I would expect that approach to continue.
Yeah. Thank you, John. So a question came in on our chat side. If the credit exam is complete for 2020, could there be a second look based on what is now published in the examiner's guide for COVID-19?
I don't think that you will see anything specific for just that. I can tell you that we're trying to put together some monitoring processes that would hopefully clue us into some of the risk that could be elevated in credit unions, but it's based off of call report data. So we're trying to take the call report data and mash it together in different ways to see if any, I'll call them COVID trends, but really it's just adverse economic trends are occurring in credit unions. And if a credit union is considered to be elevating in the risk level, it's probable and likely that you'll get a phone call from an examiner at some point talking to you about what we consider to be a potential risk issue just based off of numbers. But there's no intent to just do a sweep of credit unions and have everybody looked at for the COVID chapter. It's really going to be dependent on the credit union's individual financial trends.
Okay, John, thank you. So, Walter, if you know somebody that's raised their hand, please let me know. I have not seen that so far, and I believe we've answered the questions, even the capital question. I think we had 2 questions on capital and net worth, so those have been addressed. So, John, within that supervisory letter, there was a mention about CECL kind of off the table for a bit, if you will, as far as not coming up in the exams, which I think is, you know, it's a little way out there now. It's January of 23, but maybe comment on CECL kind of taking a back seat for a little bit.
Yeah, it's just the reprioritization at this point. Things that were important 6 months ago aren't as important right now. You know, there's only so much capacity for all of us, and that's credit union management who's trying to run an operation and serve their members. There's only so much capacity and resource at the agency to look at things. So there's the old saying, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So we're trying to really live with and to define priorities and let certain things just lay. And CECL is one of those things at this point. You know, we've got a long enough runway on this that, you know, we could not even touch this for another year, year and a half and still be okay. So that's kind of where we are at this point, trying to deal with the here and now.
Okay, great. John, early on, you were probably deluged, as we were, with a million questions about annual meetings. Maybe take a second or two and remind folks about kind of guidance about, you know, annual meetings for the rest of the year, just as a friendly reminder.
Yeah, so on the annual meeting front, you know, we have one of the early letters to credit unions that we issued talks specifically about annual meetings. And right within the body of the letter is an actual bylaw amendment that the board can adopt without having to even have the membership vote on it. The board of directors can adopt it, and it allows for a virtual annual meeting at this point. So I thought that was one of the really good things that the board did right out of the gate to alleviate that pressure. While we're on the site, one of the things that we are, I want to say, struggling with, one of the things we're debating internally right now is apparently the requirement for a board to hold at least one in-person board meeting per year. And so there's questions coming up on how do we handle that. Again, we didn't think it would ever be an issue. We figured by the summertime, everybody's back at work, never had to tackle it. But now we're over halfway through the year. We're in the middle of July, no end in sight. The possibility becomes more real that a board may never actually convene in person this year if they didn't during the first quarter. So some folks, they're looking at changes to the rules around that. At a minimum, what I would anticipate is that the regional directors would announce forbearance, that we're just not going to enforce it. I can't tell you it's not a violation, but I can tell you we're not going to do anything about it. So that would be the minimum resolution in this case. But so that tends to even make some credit unions still feel uneasy. It's like, okay, I'm still violating it, even though you're telling me you're not going to enforce it. So they're looking at actual wording changes. But for now, I can tell you that at a minimum, it'll be a forbearance program where okay, it happened. Oh, well, we're not going to do anything about it. Let's move on to 2021.
Okay, John, thank you for the reminder on that insight. So, I think, John, you're certainly a senior leader with NCUA, and it's a question that gets thrown out to a lot of people in different conversations. But from your seat at NCUA, what's keeping you up at night as far as next 6 months, next year and a half? What risk things that might not be part of the written things we see from NCUA that might be more from John Kutchey, the as again from your seat that you want to share that you can share.
So it's a great question. So I'll tackle this from a couple of different perspectives. First, I'm going to tackle it as just a person who worries about my employees. And I think this probably applies to all of you as well as industry leaders. But I'll tell you what one of the current things that's worrying me about the agency. As COVID-19 has gone on and continues to increase and spike, school systems around the country are starting to announce that they're not going back in the fall. They're going to be doing offline work. Well, I've got 300 employees in different states along the East Coast, and I have parents who are going to be impacted by this, who are now in a position where they need to homeschool their children. And if we open back up where we start doing on-site exams, as a leader, can I allow them to stay home to take care of their children, work when they can, and still get the agency's mission accomplished? So as a leader, I want to be human about this, and I want to be able to accommodate my staff. And as I told my supervisors this morning, we spend a lot of money educating our examiners, and it takes them years to become proficient at what they do. So I want to be able to accommodate them to the best of our ability so I don't lose that talent. So a talent drain is one thing that's weighing on my mind, because if it turns out I cannot accommodate them and we make a decision that if you got to go, you got to go, I could be losing potentially a lot of good staff. So that's one of the things that keeps me up. I worry about the small credit union segment of our industry. You mentioned in the opening, I started my career in credit unions, and I started it in small credit unions. So I have a fondness in my heart, and we've known for a long time, it's hard for small credit unions to compete in today's market. It just is. You got to have web banking services. You've got to have all of the touch points, or you're just not really going to grow your membership. And the thing that I've seen early in COVID is because everyone had to kind of go remote and not have walk-in operations, it tended to expose some of the shortcomings or the challenges of small credit unions. And I fear a fairly rapid increase in small credit union mergers the longer COVID-19 goes on. And that bothers me because it's where the industry started. And I'm not foolish enough to think, I understand economies of scale. I understand, survival of the fittest. How that works, but it also pains me to see small credit unions disappearing. And I fear that that's something that could actually accelerate the longer COVID-19 and offsite postures go on. Beyond that, the things you would have expected in my answer: credit risk, the unknown. Forbearance programs and loan modifications were great and are great, but as someone who has to measure and monitor risk, they also tend to hide, not intentionally, they tend to hide emerging issues. And that's one thing that worries me, if we're heading for sort of a bubble of unknown delinquency in the future because of the workout programs that we've done. And again, that's not meant to be critical. It's just the nature of the beast. What's the back end of all of this look like as we emerge out, and the ability to foreclose on properties is back in play. People who've been getting forbearance from rent have to start paying. The unemployment subsidies run out. We seem to be on this collision course where all of these points seem to drive together at the same time. So that worries me of what we don't know yet.
Yeah, John, thanks for all that. And I would agree. I mean, you know, from my seat, if you're a low asset size credit union CEO, you have one of the most challenging, but also I think oftentimes rewarding positions in the credit union system. Really special people. So Walter, again, I don't see any questions on my chat right now. I don't believe someone has raised their hand, but we want to make sure that Walter, if it's either opening up the lines and or making sure we capture any questions, that we pause for a second and do that. So I will stop talking and see if any questions come forward.
Yep, and looking at everything, Ron, we've answered the questions in the Q&A slot. I'm not seeing any indication from any of our participants raising hands or in the chat room, so I think we're looking good.
Good. Well, at this point, we are closing in on an hour, and so we'll wrap things up. John, on behalf of CCUA, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for being so accessible with our membership. We will certainly stay in touch and certainly do the same. And to all of our members out there, to everyone on the call, certainly wish you and your families and everyone at your credit union and certainly NCUA to be healthy and well. And that wraps things up. And take care and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron.